Hello and welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Today we have our prevention specialist Edward Mears from Preferred Family Healthcare Prevention Department out of Kirksville, Missouri. We're glad that you guys are able to take the time today and join us. He's going to be discussing about the strategic prevention framework element of implementation. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him and let him get us started today. Thank you, and make sure to stay tuned at the end. We will have our survey up and also be doing a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. So with that being said, Edward, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Corey, for that. As Corey said, my name is Edward Mears. I work for Preferred Family Healthcare's Prevention Department, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Strategic Prevention Framework element of implementation. So I work for Service Area 14, and that is the northeastern part of Missouri. It includes Adair, Lewis, Knox, Scotland, Schuyler, Marion, Shelby, Clark, and Macon counties. And our primary role here, and my primary role, is to mentor community coalitions in the Strategic Prevention Framework, which is an evidence-based framework that is put out by SAMHSA and is proven to get positive results in reducing substance use by youth if implemented properly. And today we're going to just talk about that implementation piece. Some of the objectives for this session are to understand what is implementation, to understand what an action plan is, and understand the 4 tasks of implementation. Building capacity, carrying out the interventions, balancing fidelity, and monitoring, evaluating, and adjusting our programs as needed. There are 5 parts of the Strategic Prevention Framework: assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, and evaluation. And today we're going to talk about step 4 and the 4 parts of that. By now we would assume that we've done an assessment and we've talked about capacity and we've made a plan and come up with our strategies and what we're going to do to affect the change in our community. So what is implementation? During the planning process, you selected some strategies to address the problems your coalition seeks to change. So during your assessment, you might have talked about alcohol or tobacco, opioids, whatever the data shows was the problem in your area. And you decided what strategies you're going to use, different events or media campaigns, things like that. And now we need to put those plans into action. We need to slow down just a little bit. There's still a lot of stuff to do before we just run out and jump on the ice with both feet. We don't want to fall through or trip. We want to make a lasting change. So first thing we need to do is we need to build some capacity and mobilize. We need to make sure the community is aware of the problems or the intervention that we've planned, the strategies that we've come up with. Does the population being served believe there's a problem? Some communities have tobacco problems, but they don't see it as a problem, or it's not something they want to address. So we need to find out if our community is one of those. Do we have the support we need? Is there people willing to help us? Do we have people in places that are willing to go out and spend their free time and help us to implement these interventions? And do we need any training for these interventions? So the first thing we want to do is we want to increase that awareness. We want to tell people about the problem we've identified. It's kind of like having a garden. When you want to grow something, the first thing you've got to do is work the soil. You got to go out and you got to till it up and turn it over, and you got to give it fertilizer and just make sure that soil is good and healthy, a nice basis for what we're doing. It's no different in coalition work. We want to go out to the people. We want to work on them. We want to make sure that they understand. We want them to see that there's a problem so that our interventions will take a stronger root. So then we need to sort of secure that support. We need to make sure that we have people in the right places. Some strategies require a certain number of people or a certain type of people to be involved. One example is the Signs of Suicide program that we do. That requires to have a number of people available when you're implementing the program. When you do the Signs of Suicide, you may have 200 or 300 kids in front of you, and they all have to do a report or a survey card that asks them about suicide. And one of the questions is, do you want to speak with someone? Well, if you have 300 kids and 50 of them say they want to talk to someone, and you've only got 3 faculty available, then you don't have enough people in place. So you don't want to put something like that into effect until you know that you have the people that you need to talk with them, or you have sufficient capacity for that. Another example would be if you wanted to do compliance checks. If you wanted to go in and make sure that the local liquor stores or grocery stores are not selling to minors, you would want to make sure that you have a law enforcement officer available to go in and do those checks with you. So having the right people in the right places is pretty important. So who's doing what? Well, we know people like to volunteer, say they're willing to help, but one thing we want to make sure is that we have something in writing. One thing we do is coalition involvement agreements, and we like to get those from those people that we need. And what that is it's just an informal contract. It's just a piece of paper signed by you and the coalition that says, hey, I'm willing to do this part of the intervention. I'm willing to come in and do those compliance checks. I'm willing to attend meetings. I'm willing to secure these necessary things. Whatever it is, it's not an actual legal document. It's just an informal contract. So we have a plan. We've talked about our assessment. We've looked at our capacity. We've made a plan with our strategies. But now we have to have a plan for each person that's involved in our action plan. So what is an action plan? It's pretty simple. It sounds just like what it is. You decide what needs to be done and who's going to do it. You want to make sure that everything that needs to be done in your intervention has someone to do it. Every piece needs to have someone working on it, or else when you get into the implementation step, you may have some holes that aren't working for you. This is an example of an older coalition that came up with some strategies that they wanted to work on. This is from 2010, but they have a plan, they have a mission to reduce substance use in Adair County among youth. Their objective was to decrease the past 30-day use of alcohol by 2% in their first year. And these are just some of the strategies that they came up with. They wanted to do a media campaign, community presentations, some youth mentoring, and they have a plan for each step. So the media campaign is the activity or the strategy, and then the responsible party is the media committee, so the members of the coalition that make up the media committee. And they even had a target date for having completion of that. Some stuff that they used to evaluate that or to make sure things were getting done was a PSA and some media outlets. And their hopeful outcome was to educate the community with emphasis on parents and increase their awareness about youth alcohol use. So that was just a very broad plan: media campaign, media committee, and a target date. So let's say we wanted to do something like that. We wanted to come up with a plan. Let's say our strategy is to do an after prom. We want to reduce the use of alcohol or tobacco. This is a pretty broad one. So we want to do our strategy as after prom. Who's going to do it? Well, we have a committee that handles our after prom, and so they're responsible for it. And the timeline or the date of the event is on 4/21. That's the day that we're going to hold this after prom. So some more defined roles, because all we know right now is we're having an after prom. Now we need to put some of that in place. We need to start putting people to work on that. So one thing that we need is a gymnasium. We have to have a place to hold the event. So we're going to have a task of securing the gymnasium. Who's going to do it? Well, Steve Johnson's going to do it. Maybe Steve Johnson is the principal of the school. Maybe he's the gym coach or a teacher or counselor, someone who's best suited to do that job because they already know the people they need to talk to and they know what to work on with it. And we've asked, Steve Johnson, we would like him to have that gym secured by the 5th. We want to make sure it's going to be there in case we have to change our plan. We need someone to book a DJ. We'd like to have music. Well, we have Alice Miller. Alice Miller's brother-in-law or cousin runs a DJ service. So she's a great person to get in and get that for us. We've asked her to have that done by the 10th. So we want to have these things done ahead of time. And this is just a couple of examples. Obviously, for a plan, you would need a lot more. You would want to have decorations and refreshments and things like that. So these are just a couple of examples. So with that, after proms are great, but I want to talk to you about EVPs, which are evidence-based practices. Now these are similar to after proms, except that they're more in depth. These programs are tested, they've been proven to work, we've seen positive results over and over again as long as they are done properly. And there are many, many different EVP programs for the different problems you may have identified. You can go on websites like the National Registry for Evidence-Based Programs and Practices, NREP for short, and find hundreds of different evidence-based programming for the different problems. And it's not specific to just substance use. That's what we're talking about today. We want to address substance use, but this is a website that's filled with information for many, many different problems as well. So some examples you may be familiar with for evidence-based practices are Big Brother, Big Sister. That's a very popular one. It's been around for a long time. Signs of Suicide, I mentioned that earlier. It's an effective suicide program for reducing youth suicide rates. And Mental Health First Aid is another one. And then the Not on Tobacco. You can find all of these on the NREP website and a big definition of what they are. And these programs, again, are proven to work for what they're intended for. Many interventions that use evidence-based practices require a little bit of training before you can actually use them. Sometimes it's a couple hours, sometimes it's a couple of days. But the training is important in order to implement that program effectively and properly. And it also gives the people implementing it more confidence in what they're doing. They've gone to some training, they understand what the program is intended for and how to do it. So when they go to start implementing it, they can feel confident about what they're doing. So now we're talking about carrying out our interventions. When we worked on our plan, we looked at those evidence-based strategies we talked about and programs, and we want to help reduce that problem. So now we need to implement those while maintaining the fidelity of the programs. So when we talk about fidelity, we're not talking about your 401k. We're talking about the program you selected. Those evidence-based programs require you to maintain a certain amount of fidelity or to stick to the model that was created. We want to be able to provide a program that makes a lasting and effective change in our community. But in order to do that, we have to do it as the program was intended. So some examples of fidelity. When you bake a cake, you have a recipe that you follow very closely. Now you can change the icing, you can add a little food coloring and decorations, put some candles in it, things like that. But you don't want to start adding more flour and salt or throwing a couple extra sticks of butter in there. That would just ruin the cake. It would be disgusting. You would have horrible results. You'd end up throwing that cake in the trash. You would have wasted your time and your energy and all your resources, and it's just not a good idea. So when you do bake a cake, you want to stick to that recipe. And it's the same with these programs. They come with the directions. They have a reason for the way they do these things. And so when we learn about them, we get our training, we implement them, we want to try and stick as close to those guidelines as we possibly can and change as little as we possibly can. So stick with it. The closer you stick to that fidelity, while adapting it a little bit, while you're changing your icing and while you're adding a little food coloring to it, stick as close as you can to that fidelity. If you need to change small parts to conform to your budgets or the population or maybe the areas you're in, make sure you're keeping those important parts. And when you get that training on those programs, they'll tell you those parts that cannot be changed. One example, we teach mental health first aid here in the prevention department to community members. And we're supposed to teach classes with 30 or less people. And there are times when we have 31 or 33 people. It's okay for us to teach that class with 33 people. We just can't go adding 40 people and 50 people to the class. So, adapting it. If you have to change that icing, then add a little food coloring to it. Try to select programs that need as little change as possible. You know, we want to just select something that is just as close to perfect for our community as we can get. If you have to change things, change the capacity before you change any of the programming. You know, that might be doing some smaller groups or maybe doing some more training. So again, with our example of the mental health first aid, if I have 40 people and I'm only supposed to have 30 in a class, maybe I would do 2 classes and do 20 people in each class. You know, I'd have to hold another training completely and do it separate, but that way I can still stick to my fidelity and provide that to the community at the same time. So ask the developer of the program if you are unsure of what you can and can't change. You know, they may have suggestions. You know, they hear about the trainings that are going on all over the place for the people they've trained. And so they may have great ideas on how you can tailor it or what you really can't change. But the important part is that we retain the vital components of the program, because that evidence-based part gets lost the more we change it. You know, the evidence is that this program will work if you do it this way. So if you start changing too much, then they can't give you those same results. And that's what we want. We want to create that lasting change. And this all goes back to your strategic plan. You know, you select these strategies because you wanted to make that effective change. Remember to think about the people you're working with. We want to remain culturally competent. That's a big part of our strategic prevention framework, is we don't want to single or leave anyone out. You want to think about the population that you're working with. You want to tailor your intervention for the culture you'll be working with. A couple examples, if you're working with low-income families, then we don't want to assume that they have access to funds to attend a program. So we wouldn't want to have an after prom where we charge $5 or $10 admission. Those low-income families may not have the money to attend that, and so we would be offering programming that no one can go to. Another example is if you're working with older adults, we don't want to assume that those older adults know everything about technology. We don't want to assume that they don't either, but at the same time, a lot of older adults they don't know how to use iPads or complicated computers and things, and so tailor that programming to work with them. Another thing we see a lot of is we work with immigrants, and they may not read or speak English. One good example of that is here in Missouri, we see more and more Congolese coming into the country as refugees. Most of them only speak French or can only read in French. So if I select a program and implement it in English, I'm not going to affect a lot of change because not a lot of the people I'm working with can speak or read the language that I'm implementing that with. And that's another good part of your assessment phase. You want to assess that in the beginning so that you can select appropriate strategies for that. So we want to monitor and evaluate. We want to make sure that during the implementation of the programs, we're looking at how things are going. Are they being implemented the same by everyone? Is everyone reporting the same reactions from the community? Are some people struggling to adapt? we can come together and we can talk about, hey, I'm having these problems with this group, or things are going great over here. This is what we're doing. Maybe it's a little different. Um, we want to make sure that we understand how everything's working in the different parts so that everyone is on the same page and we're getting the same results. So we've looked at our action plan. This is kind of a follow-up. This is how we're monitoring and evaluating as we go. We asked Steve, if he could get that gymnasium by 4 or 5. So in our outcome, we want to say, hey, Steve was able to get that by the 25th of March. He got that way ahead of time. He's got it secured. We don't have to worry about that now. We can evaluate that, and we can look at that again next year. If we're going to do an after prom next year, we know that Steve is dependable to do that, and so we can ask Steve to do that. And maybe Steve can do some other stuff too. And it's working good. And the same way with Alice. If Alice is working good, then we can evaluate that and move on. We don't want to just leave it to chance and hope that everything came out. We want to keep a close eye on everything and just make sure our strategies are working the way we intended them to. So if the program is not working the way you hoped it would, then we need to reassess and make some changes. Sometimes maybe that means giving up the strategy we started with in the first place. Maybe it's just not working the way we want it to, or we're using a lot of resources, or it's taking a lot of manpower. We didn't intend for it to work this way. So we want to look at that as we're going on, make the adjustments where we need to. Maybe it may come down to just cutting our losses. This strategy is not working out. So we need to stop here. We need to readjust our resources, reassess, and go forward. And the strategic prevention framework that we're talking about is not linear. Sometimes maybe we need to go back and reassess what we're doing. Or we need to look at our plan and see if we need to change some of those strategies. And that's what we want to do, because we want to affect a lasting change in the substance use problem. We want to be careful with overlap. We don't want to provide the same service that another place is already providing. One example of this is, maybe there's already a big sister, big brother program in your community. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to start another big sister, big brother program, because all you're going to do is get the same people that are already attending that. So we want, and that's part of our assessment and planning phase as well. The implementation phase requires that we look at every little piece as we go. And so another example, we don't want to provide a service at the same time that another community service is being provided. So if we started doing program at 4 to 5 and there's already a program going on across town at 4 to 5, then we're going to miss the people that are at that program. So we want to make sure that our programming is not on top of theirs. Maybe we need to do ours from 5:30 to 6:30, whatever the case may be, so that we can get the people that are in those other programs as well. We want to provide services to as much people as we possibly can to reduce that substance use in our community. Well, that's all I have today about implementation, but I hope you will attend our next webinar, which will be about community coalition funding, and that'll be provided by Nick Cook. We hope you'll like us on our Facebook page at Prevention or PFH Prevention. And if you have any questions or would like to have any more information, send us a message at moprevention@pfh.org. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Corey, who I hope has made our drawing, and we'll see if we have a winner. It's all yours, Corey.